I think what we have, and I hope what you can see, is that we come today with the greatest care for illness, the greatest respect. But I want to pose a question, and my staff will go, "Oh no, he's saying it again." But it's a question that underpins everything that we will be talking about. It's a question that we all have to ask. It's a question perhaps for inside the clinical setting. It is a question that we all have to ask and be able to answer. Today, I would like to proclaim that my mental health is not good. It's not good. But the question is, what do I actually mean? What do I actually mean when I use the term, my mental health is not good? Have we ever thought about that? Because it's a phrase, it's an expression that is bounced around all over the place. And I am fearful that it will lead and is leading to a reduction in care for those living with illness. So I asked myself, my mental health is not good today. Am I talking about a bad day? Maybe a busy day? Or am I talking about a diagnosed mental health illness? Because I'd like to say that the two are very, very different. We are in a place where I believe, and many believe, we are using clinical language when we are talking about everyday emotions. And there is a danger. And we would say today that there is, I believe, and the title of my book is that there is a mental health confusion. There is confusion about what we mean. And let's see an example. If we do not know what the term mental health actually means in the real world, day to day, as we go about our business, if we believe that, we then add in another thought. Let's normalize mental health. I'm not criticizing that campaign at all because it's a beautiful thing and it's saved lives. But if there is confusion about what mental health is, and if everybody or many people think that it's the normal day to day and we need to normalize mental health, are we at risk of normalizing illness? And today, I would say, if anything you take from this, explore those thoughts. Because these thoughts have been in my mind and the minds of many others since 2018. It took me a long time to write a book. But in 2018, there was, I believe, a peak when the mental health narrative became trendy. Every Tom, Dick and Harry, every celebrity would talk about their mental health. And we see it on social media, we see it everywhere. My mental health, my mental health. And messages get confused. And what we have and what we see is the saddest thing, that mental health illness for many is becoming an identity. I am depressed. I am anxious. I am bipolar. I am actually. I am OCD. And you think, well, it's just describing things. It doesn't really matter, does it? Yes, it does. Because what we have tried to do over the last 30 years is get the reputation of mental health at the same level as physical health. How we work with physical health is how we want mental health to work. If today I went out and was very unwell and I went to hospital and I found out that I had cancer, I would not come home and say, I am cancer. Would I? I am depressed? No. You are living with depression. And make sure it's clinically diagnosed. Because I personally think that mental health illnesses should be diagnosed by professionals. Because again, if we want the same level of respect for those with physical and mental health difficulties and illnesses, we cannot wake up and think I'm having a bad day, therefore I am depressed. Depression is a powerful, sacred word. Every mental health clinical expression terminology is a precious word to those who suffer. And we have to understand. I would not wake up and think, oh, that mole on my back, if I was able to see, that mole on my arm, it looks like cancer, so therefore I have cancer. We would not say that. So why can we say it about mental health illnesses? We cannot any longer self-diagnose, because self-diagnosing is a problem. Because we might see it on TikTok, this and this, and we might relate to individuals and say, yeah, I think that. And what an individual does online or wherever, talking and so on. Perhaps young people in the playground at school. Perhaps we start to think that that's me. I identify. And do you know what? You might. And you might be living with those things, but we need professional diagnosis. Because with self-diagnosis, we can start living a life which might not be ours to live. We can be on a pathway thinking that we have some type of illness when maybe we don't. And what that would do is put us in the way of things that aren't healthy for us. Self-diagnosis. It's a problem. We need to face up to it. It's dangerous, just as it would be with physical health. And let's just say it again. Mental health illnesses are not a common cold. And let's think about this for a second. Because I stand here as somebody who knows what illness is. And before you say it is diagnosis, it is diagnosed. And I do have a certificate, and it says NHS at the top. And do I really want that diagnosis? No, I don't. I don't want that diagnosis. I didn't go to the psychiatrist and walked up and think, right, I know things are difficult. I'm going to sit down and I really hope that they give me a diagnosis. I went to the hospital, to the doctors, to find out what is wrong with me. I did not want a diagnosis in the same way that if I go to the hospital, I do not want to be diagnosed with cancer. Depression and anxiety. For 20 years, I've worked with young people. Privileged, utterly privileged. Wonderful individuals with great resilience. And many with diagnosed difficulties and illnesses. I've seen the pain of mental illness. And it is real. And it is terrifying. Because we need to protect illness. Because there is a cohort of individuals that are starting to get on the bandwagon of everybody's ill, everybody's got mental health. We need to protect. I've seen young people, sometimes without a dream, difficulties. I've seen the scars. I've seen the tears. So I know illness when I see it. We've got to protect it. Myself, I've lived with bipolar all my life, apparently. It took me 16 years to have a diagnosis. It took me another 6 years to work out what that meant. And it was only, and it was only when that was good timing. And it was only when I realized one thing. I didn't know what was bipolar or Barry, but I found out one day that some things are bipolar and some things are Barry, and that changed my life. I've been around illness all my life. I've had the privilege of seeing resilience in the face of trauma. And yes, she is here, my mum. We have to protect illness because someone is coming along and the doubters are growing. Illness. You may see that this means a lot to me. I won't be talking for much longer, but apparently that is my catchphrase at work and I carry on. And George up front here is smiling away because he knows it's true. But the narrative of the mental health awareness has to change. Not change per se, evolve. It has to. It really does. Because I will say, and this should be empowering, that not every emotion is illness, but every emotion deserves to be heard. Think about that. We have said that mental health illness is real. The stigma should have gone. Hasn't all. That was success of the last 30 years. We have said that it's good to talk, and yes, it is. But talking has saved lives, but it also has to come with responsibility. You think of the young, a school filled in the summer. Let's say 5 or 6 teenagers sat in the grass, on the grass. And one of them says, I had a rough night and I self-harmed. It's good to talk, but what about the other 4? Let's think about that. That individual has spoken, and they should. But it's important that there's responsibility. Because what about if that young person, the other four, I'm really worried about that person. I'm scared for them. And what about if that progresses into illness? And what about if there is another person who goes, oh, that's a way to cope? Do we have a mental health crisis? Yes, but maybe it's also a pandemic. Because the surroundings that we occupy ourselves in impact us in all different ways. Everyday emotions cannot be framed as illness. Grief, the hardest thing we will ever experience, but it doesn't start with illness. It doesn't start, not usually. And this is what we have to understand, is that as we journey along life's path and we see the things that test us, they're not necessarily illness, but unchecked, they can turn into illness. So the question that you might be thinking all of a sudden is, well, how do we know that it's illness? I am not a trained practitioner. I'm a person who does education stuff. It is not my place to decide when illness has breached into a dangerous place. That is for the trained professional. And I might be wrong about that. I might be a simple little chappie with a simple little idea. But how do we know? It is not my decision. I need to talk to a doctor, a GP. I don't need to go on TikTok. I'm sure no one here has TikTok. Maybe. But is that a dangerous place? Yes. So how do we know? Well, we seek professional help because that is why they're trained. And yes, we know services are stretched. We get that. But we need to speak to at least our GP. Social media, life, everything that we've experienced of change in the last 40 years came up on the video. Let's have a think about our lives now. Compared to 40 years ago, some of you might not have been around 40 years ago, I don't know. But we can track the last 40 years of social change. Have a think about it. Change so dramatic in the way that we live. Social media, yes, but the way that we are driving all over the place. We work in different time zones and all over the place. Nothing sits still. We get used to one social media platform and it turns into another. Another idea pops up on social media or in the media, and we are onto another idea, another concept. Life is so fast compared to previous generations. Think about the dangers of that. Are we seeing? Do we have complicated lives? Do we have simple lives? Is this impacting our health? Or am I talking rubbish? We have to understand our lives have changed, but we haven't perhaps seen it as much as we should. The hardest thing when in illness is to get out of bed in the morning. And if you've been in that position, you will know the hardest thing is to get out of bed in the morning, to dream about the future, to dream about what to do in the next hour, the next half an hour. But that doesn't mean that we have to stay there. It doesn't mean that it's our destination to be there. Diagnosis is the foundation of recovery. For some, that might take weeks. Some, that might take years, a lifetime. But we have to also challenge ourselves, don't we? I thought I was challenging myself for many years, but I don't know if I actually was. I once thought and said to myself that my best friends were depression and mania. My best friends were my diagnosis. That's how I felt. That's how I saw things. But we have to challenge those things as individuals and as a society. Because I know that if someone in this audience would say, why don't you go for a walk, a run, a jog? It's good for your physical health. It will probably be my father that is saying that. On and on and on and on. And there's obvious reasons. But there is no way I would turn around and say, well, that's not good for my physical health. No. It is obvious that it is good for my physical health. Here's Mike. Picks its moments. We need a replacement. It is obvious that it's good for my physical health. I wouldn't say, oh. But if I do too much, if I run too far, if I weightlift too much, yes, there is danger. But how many times do we now say, it's not good for my mental health? Why? Because growth, challenge, and all of those things within moderation make us grow and challenge what we think we might be. And I talk from experience. Prevention cannot just happen in the clinical setting. Prevention has to happen outside of the clinical setting. We can have preventative services, and we need so many more services. I cannot tell you how much we need and the pain that the services or lack of thereof are doing to us. I cannot go to work and think that I won't hear something sad. But we cannot just accept that we have another preventative service because we're just expanding services and it won't last. We need them, yes, but we need to think bigger. We need to look at our own lives. We need to build what perhaps we've lost in the past. Community, warmth, understanding what is good for us. Looking at all those changes. Not using the language of illness in our everyday. Not self-diagnosing. Not looking inward. Because that's what illness is. But we only know that if we have been diagnosed correctly. So I believe we're at a crossroads, and I'm nearly finished. I believe we're at a crossroads because you can see in the media that people are becoming disillusioned. The soft generation. Are they just lazy? And so on and so on. And there will be demands on people, and the words that will be used will destroy souls. So we need to evolve the narrative of the mental health awareness campaign. Not all emotion is illness, but all emotion deserves to be heard, and it can be heard in lots of different ways. So if you believe a fraction of what I have said, say hello. Not now. Say hello. Drop us a line, an email, social media. Because we want to take this campaign to places as high as possible. I believe that there is an argument for a re-look at the Mental Health Act. At the moment, it is wishy-washy. I believe that there must be changes that says quite clearly there is a difference between everyday emotion and that of illness. And only then will we protect the future. Please go away later, have a think, because today I stand here, trembling in my boots that are too small for me at the moment, knowing that what we are saying publicly, very few are willing to say. And I do feel that my head is on the block and the axe might fall. Is Barry the hero or the villain? But these things need to be said because illness needs to be protected at all costs. And my line I love so much, and I'll say it again and again, and maybe you know what I'm going to say, that not all emotion is illness, but all emotions deserve to be heard. That is the future, I believe, of the narrative of the mental health awareness campaign that has saved lives and given people dignity. And so may it continue, may it evolve. Thank you.